the headline of this week's national interest is Mayday, Mayday, India calling, or India calling, Mayday, Mayday. Now, this is not because this is May 1 and this is May Day in that sense. We all know what is May Day in terms of an international call sign. That is an emergency call sign where an aircraft, a ship, anybody is in distress, then the internationally acknowledged call sign of distress is Mayday, Mayday. That means I need help. So that is what India is doing right now. India is sending out that call to the whole world, and then help is arriving from a lot of the world. And as that help is arriving, we are happy to notice that the government, Modi government, is welcoming, it is seeking that help, it is welcoming it, and we are happy to note that a lot of the ministers in this government, when these planes arrive with literally with oxygen for the sick people to breathe, they actually celebrate this. They also post thank you notes. Now, this is a big change for a government which normally would have sneered at any idea of getting any foreign assistance because they were so fixated with the idea of being Atmanirbhar about everything. Now, the fact is, when you are in trouble, you seek help. I would remember from my childhood in small town, my humble home in small towns of North India, and I'm sure most of us have some similar comparisons, recollections, which is that when occasionally you found that your household, your kitchen was out of sugar, maybe on the 26th or 27th of the month, because we are also children of the rationed sugar era, or something else had run out. What would you do? You would go to the neighbor's house with a katori and say, can I borrow a katori of sugar? I'll return it as soon as I get some. And that was usually done, and often enough the neighbor would also come and do it. So there is no shame in asking for help when you need help. Just like neighbors help each other, countries help each other. It is a good idea, and now it's quite clear that India had asked for help because US is sending most of its aid through USAID and through USAID funds. And even Britain has said that their funds are coming from FCDO, which is Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which is their aid agency, and EU. And all three have said that they are responding to requests from India. So no shame about, as I said, no shame about going to the neighbor's house and asking for a katori or a bowl of sugar if you are out of it. This is fine. But what happens is that a nation, unlike a household, also is part of a strategic environment. A strategic environment and a balance of power around you. And everybody is looking at how strong or how weak you are. And that is how people also tailor their reactions. So see, in this situation, we now have both our adversaries, that is Pakistan, Imran Khan, and China, Xi Jinping, both expressing sympathy and offering support. Now, what is the Pakistan? What is it that the Pakistanis are telling us? The Pakistanis are saying the subtext. This is all very well crafted in diplomatic jargon, very correct language. But the subtext is, listen, don't be shy of asking for help, or don't be shy of accepting our help. We are there to help you. But the subtext is, you are not that much bigger and that much more powerful than us than you had believed or that you had pretended to be all this while. And what is Xi Jinping doing? Xi Jinping is trying to put you in your place, because Xi Jinping at the same time is doing other things. He's trying to take advantage of India's situation, not so much by pushing at India's troops in Ladakh. That is something that Indian army can handle, but by getting around to India's neighbors, calling a meeting of the foreign ministers of South Asian region and saying what is it that we can do by way of cooperating, essentially on COVID. But once again, if you read between the lines, what he's saying is, don't count on India for help. We know that you count on India, and we know that India treats this zone as its own exclusive arc of influence. But see, India is in such a bad state right now. She's saying that, I'm not saying that. India is in such a bad state right now that it can't even fulfill its contractual obligations on vaccine and pharmaceutical supplies to you. So why are you counting on that? You come to us. So you find people who are not so friendly sort of crowding around and trying to find strategic space and brownie points at the same time. So in such a situation, there is no shame. One should not be hesitated. No country should be hesitated. And the fact is that when American health system had crashed, when the British health system had crashed, European health systems had crashed, when Wuhan had crashed, India had also sent assistance. So this is a time when people, neighbors, friends help each other. It just so happens that in our case, our immediate neighborhood is not as friendly as it could be. In fact, if anything, Chinese said when they called a meeting of the foreign ministers of the South Asian or subcontinental region, they also said that Indian foreign minister was also welcome to join it. That to my mind was a real, I would say, unsubtle turning of the knife. Of course, after that, our foreign minister spoke. Xi Jinping also wrote a letter to Prime Minister of India. But once again, read that letter. I only have a Google translation of the letter. It was written in Mandarin from Chinese media. It says, with the breakout of this pneumonia, it doesn't say COVID, it doesn't say anything that might indicate the origin to have been Wuhan or China. It says pneumonia. Anyway, so in that situation, if we are saying it was perfectly all right to ask for help, and what are we arguing about in this national interest? So here I am putting up a proposition to you for discussion. And the proposition is, while offering help to another country requires a big heart, it also requires one big heart to seek it. Okay, so where is the argument, you might ask again? Then I will say that that level of humility cannot come from a closed mind. You have to have an open mind, because if you have a closed mind, then you become like a North Korean or a Cuban or the current Venezuelan regime, where it doesn't matter what's happening to your people. You keep your power consolidated and you don't seem to be seeking any help, because why do you care about the people? That is not India. Whatever complaints you might have, this is not India. So it is a good thing that India has reached out for help. And when you reach out for help, you need a large heart and an open mind, because you are caught in a murderous quagmire. So the question is, and that is the argument, it would not have hurt if some of this large heart and open mind had been displayed earlier, when things were not so bad, when India had had a respite after the first wave. Then instead of claiming victory and shouting from everywhere, hailing ourselves as the vaccine guru of the world, the priority could have been, if we were a little more humble, the priority could have been to settle down and collect as many doses of the vaccine as possible, because every country in the world, we knew it already, that every country in the world has had a devastating second wave. In most countries, the second wave has been worse than the first wave. It's just that we were lucky, we lucked out, because our second wave came much after vaccinations came in. Globally, vaccinations started mid-December. India started vaccinations mid-January for our own reasons. I don't understand those. I know that 16 January is a good auspicious date. But the fact is that even then, we had had a 3-month head start almost over the second wave. And we wasted it. That is the time when we should have been building up, stockpiling our vaccines. Because unlike the past, now we have a weapon to fight the virus. For that weapon, we just had to produce and stockpile more bullets or more bombs or more missiles, more ammunition. That we didn't do. On the other hand, we were allowing exports of the vaccine, which again I have no problem with. If an Indian company had contracted orders, that Indian company should have supplied. If Government of India wanted to claim credit, obviously it's entitled to claim credit, because these are vaccines made in India. It doesn't matter whether they were designed in India or not. They were designed by a public funded laboratory in Oxford University. India is the vaccine production capital of the world, just as India is the generic pharma home of the world. So it was great to continue with exports. I don't complain about exports, but at the same time, while we exported this and celebrated these exports and hailed this as vaccine mastery, that's all very fine. If we were a little more humble, if we had large enough hearts and open minds, then we should have also seen that if tiny Seychelles or tiny Mauritius or tiny. I don't know if they were sent to Papua New Guinea or Bermuda or any of these Caribbean islands, because these were sent all over the world to small countries. If they are so grateful to us for getting a few lakh or a couple of millions or a few million of these vaccines, I know the size of my population. The size of my population is no state secret. I don't have to go to the CIA website to check the details of my population, although you can do that also. It's a pretty useful open website, but leave that aside. So we knew what our requirements were going to be. So why were these orders not placed on time? Now I understand that there are audit issues. There is the CAG. All bureaucracies are afraid of audit issues, which means if I close my price negotiation too soon, even if these are Indian companies, Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, if I close my price negotiation very soon, then tomorrow some auditor may come or somebody will say there is a scandal, JPC, etc. I don't want the CBI, CBC, etc. coming and knocking at my door after I retire. Those are usual fears that civil services, that bureaucracies, whether civil service bureaucracy or health bureaucracy, that they have. Again, the question of can you pay advance for these goods that you are going to buy. Now in the government system, nobody wants to pay any money even after you bought something. But to think of advance required very unconventional thinking and some risk taking on the part of the government. Now you would say that look, bureaucracies, whether in health or in the IAS, would not take such a risk, because to pay a large advance, Serum Institute wanted 3,000 crores. Bharat Biotech, because this was their own production and this was a design between them and government laboratories, that is National Institute of Virology and ICMR, they wanted to scale up big time, and their scales for this vaccine were very small. They needed a lot more money also, and they said, even if you don't give us a grant, ideally India should have given grants to its companies. But even if they could not have given grants, then what's been done now should have been done earlier. What's been done now is now large orders have been placed, and now advance money has also been paid, say about 3,000 crores to Serum Institute of India for Covishield vaccine and about 1,800 crores to Bharat Biotech for Covaxin, that is a domestically made vaccine. Now it will take them time scaling up, because you don't just scale it up by saying that, all right, I just need more vaccines. You need to maybe either create a new production line or shift another production line which is producing some other vaccines to this production line, figure out what happens to those supplies, because India itself has a very large Indradhanush universal immunization program, plus a lot of the world depends on Indian vaccines, not just for COVID, but for many things else. So this is as if you knew that a war was coming. The little ammunition that you had, you knew that a lot of the world was facing that war, so you were sharing that ammunition with your allies, but you were not stockpiling ammunition on your own. That is where you got stuck. So let me go back to my household, my home running short of sugar story. Now it's one thing if a neighbor comes knocking at your door to ask for sugar, and you give your neighbor some sugar, but what if you only have one katori? So either you say no, or you go and get a bag full of sugar. In this case, this was nothing that was rationed like the 60s, like the mid 60s or early 70s. This is where India had the factories to produce a lot more than we've been producing. We just needed to take a punt, take a reasonable thinking punt, and make those investments in our own companies in time. That was not done. Once again, if you say everybody is scared of litigation tomorrow, objections tomorrow, suppose it doesn't work out, Narendra Modi came to power on the promise that he was going to cut through all this. For his government and for him not to be able to do so is really no defense. Now what had happened was, it's not as if India had not sent these 6 crore odd vaccines to the rest of the world, India would have been out of the woods now. 6 crores after all, if India has a vaccination drive, of the kind of dimensions and pace that India needs, that is anything upwards of 7 million doses a day. Ideally, 10 million if we want to break the back of this wave. Then in a month and a half, we can do it. But if India had to even start delivering 60, 70 million doses in a day, which is about twice or 2.5 times as much as we've been doing lately, then this 6 crores would have been consumed, would have backstopped us or would have cushioned us for just about 2 weeks. India's stockpile should have been much higher than this, because once again our population was not a secret to anybody. Why was that not done? Now think about what was happening. Now last week of January, the Prime Minister was telling World Economic Forum that India is the pharma capital of the world, right? That is one. It's the pharmacy of the world. Fantastic. It was said at a time, mind you, when less than 1.5% of Indian population had been vaccinated. That was then. After that, up to mid-March, our health minister was saying that India is in the end game situation with the pandemic. The numbers had started to rise from the second week of February onwards. In fact, if you look at Delhi's numbers went up from 0.23%. So at 0.23% test positivity, let me try and put this in perspective. Why do I say 0.23% test positivity is like, see you COVID, goodbye COVID positivity rate? That means in about 440 samples that you picked, you found one positive. That is a stage at which you say, now COVID is in remission, I can resume normal life. From that stage, it did not reach 32%. 32% means of every 3 that you test, 1 is positive, and now it might be even higher. There are days when it gets to 35, 36% in Delhi. It did not go from 0.23 to 32 overnight. It happened over a period of 4-5 weeks. And this is when every rise should have been alarming somebody or concerning somebody that, look, this is getting out of control. There is trouble coming up. But so much was self-congratulation, because what happens is that when you get caught in a self-congratulatory spiral, you start believing everything that you've been saying. Now, Joe Biden, just the other day, when he gave his address to his joint session, he said that trickle-down economics never works. After that, he tweeted also that trickle-down economics has never worked. So now we'll have growth going bottom-up and middle-out. Now, that is an eternal argument for political economies, whether trickle-down works or not in economics. There is a Thatcher Reagan school that believes it works. There is the other school that believes it doesn't. That's an ongoing debate in India as well. So let's leave that aside. The important thing is, does trickle-down work with leadership? So the answer is, the short and I think indisputable answer is that leadership style, method does trickle top down. And the stronger the leader, the more successful the leader, the stronger this downpour downwards. And that is what happened in this case, that the message that came down from the top leadership, that is the Prime Minister himself, to all his team was that declare victory, it's fine, we've done all right. And meanwhile, we were setting ourselves for this murderous ambush, because this virus waits. And when that happened, we suddenly found that the same things that we were talking about distributing to the world, we were now short of. And we were asking for everything now, from oxygen to remdesivir to even the vaccines. Now, any vaccines will be welcome. We are now hoping that Americans have their stock of 6 crore vaccines, AstraZeneca vaccines, which is the same as Covishield in India. Even if they release 2 crores, 3 crores of those to India in good time, at least it will cushion us for some time, giving us a better vaccination rate, at least for the first week or 10 days until our production picks up, because orders have only recently been placed. The states have been given their pricing only very recently. They also have their bureaucracies. They also just can't send somebody out to go buy a few bags full of the vaccine. So all this will take time, plus the manufacturing will take time. On the other hand, because we didn't seem to understand this urgency, we designed this really algebraically I've lived my life in the fear of algebra. This algebraically complex pattern of pricing where one government, central government will give it free to 45 plus, state governments will buy at their own price, which manufacturers will declare, then on central government's appeal, they will reduce it. Then each state can also go and negotiate with them. And then private sector can also import from outside any of the approved vaccines and price them as they want. This just became too confusing. I have no problem at all. I'm a laissez-faire person, for better or worse. I have no problem at all letting the private sector charge whatever it wants. They can only charge what the market will pay. I don't mind what they charge as long as there are enough doses available in the government system. But that wasn't the case. At the same time, we opened up all these floodgates of ideas where there was no clarity. Now today I see a memo that's been issued by the Union Health Ministry to the states on how to deal with the new vaccine policy and rollout. I will share it with you on the screen. I will share also a link with you. If you think this is a way of simplifying what should have been the simplest thing to do, then I would say that this is a compliment to the Indian civil service system, that they will complicate something so simple. In fact, it's a well-known truism that in the government system, what is simple works. Why did Manrega work? Manrega worked because it is simple. It just says when somebody comes and asks for help for a job, you have to give it. So there is no discretion anywhere. There is no collecting of this, counting of that, returning of this. But please read this. In this order, the central government even says that if you have any vaccine doses given by us for the 45 plus age group, which you have not been able to deliver so far, return them to us. Don't divert them to anything. Now, can you imagine in the government system, somebody starts returning these, then somebody starts inventorying these in the government system, then giving elsewhere. These are perishable commodities. When you have vaccines out, the idea is to get those into people's arms, but that is if you understand how serious this crisis is, because right now everybody seems to be a little frozen. So even when the explosion in Kerala and Maharashtra took place first, the idea was, one, these are opposition states. So see what Kerala, everybody was praising Kerala model. What happened there? Maharashtra, see, the best chief minister in the country, supposedly, see what's happening in his state. Also, there was, I can understand politicians doing it. It is politics. Politicians have to do politics. What else will they do? But what about the experts? What about the COVID group, the crisis group? What about the Ministry of Health? What about the cabinet? This cabinet has very well qualified people, intelligent people. What were they saying? What was the Prime Minister saying? Could they count on interstate boundaries stopping the spread of a virus which has no respect, which has sheer contempt even for oceans? This virus believes in no national boundaries, no oceanic boundaries, no transatlantic, no trans-Pacific, no trans-Indian Ocean, no trans-Indo-Pacific. Why would it bother about boundaries between, say, Maharashtra and Gujarat, Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh, so on and so forth? So it spread all over. And as it spread all over, by that time, we had our Kumbh, etc., and election campaigning on. If this was anticipated, many of these things could have been done in the past. And once again, arguments were political that, see, where Kumbh has taken place, Uttarakhand has so few cases. The fact is that very few people from Uttarakhand go to the Kumbh. It is from the countryside, deep rural countryside in UP and Bihar, where the stress is right now, where the stress is and where our health care is the poorest. So that is the reason I say that we were setting ourselves up for slaughter because of this overconfidence and because of this triumphalism. And this has brought us to a state where India has to actively seek foreign aid after almost 4 decades. I don't use that as a specific cutoff, but it's nearly after 4 decades that we have to ask for aid. Remember, when the tsunami happened, Gujarat earthquake happened, governments of the day in India said that they did not want international relief. Now I understand that this crisis is a global emergency. Of course, it still doesn't mean that our triumphalism has subsided yet. We are not doing basic things like setting up a national control room, a national war room, crisis room, whatever you call it, where everybody can reach out. Look at the state of Delhi. Once again, there is name calling and there is passing of the buck. So our triumphalism at the top particularly is still on, because if it had gone, then we would not be embarrassing ourselves using our top diplomats or asking our top diplomats to complain about foreign media coverage of the gravity of this crisis. What brought us to this crisis? What can we do to fix this crisis while we seek and accept help from the same countries in this crisis? That is not the way to do it. Shoot the messenger might be a good idea, but the message will not go away. And if the message is not delivered, it will not be good for any country, state, corporation, family, anybody who has a stake in a situation. You need to face up to the message, drop your triumphalism, have some humility, and deal with this very nasty problem.